Interstate is leading the efforts of more efficient therapies and greater life-enhancing treatments for mental health with scientifically backed research and quality products from psychedelics, virtual reality, and neuroscience. One of the demonstration areas upstairs is an Interstate virtual reality device that we can talk a little bit about.
No, it's downstairs.
Oh, downstairs. They moved it virtually. Having signed a truly groundbreaking research agreement at the first ever venture to receive DEA approval, that's the Drug Enforcement Agency if you're not familiar, they're given approval for a psilocybin producing mushroom grow house at a major university, I think it's in the Midwest.
Correct, yep.
Not California. And Interstate is focused on the search for the other beneficial molecules in the magic mushrooms, elucidating the entourage effect of whole mushrooms whose healing properties are potentially 10 times more effective than synthetic psilocybin. Interstate is a platform for better mental health tools with the mission to bridge the gap between wellness, science, research to create safe, accessible, and effective mental health tools with optimized positive effects. How many folks want that? Raise your hand. Yeah.
All right.
There you go.
Love
you
it.
guys are good. So, there's so much to unpack in just the introduction. We really need 2 or 3 hours, so we're just going to have to cancel the music and everything else. So we really want to make sure this is a conversation tonight. It's not, a diatribe, and we're not speaking at you. We're speaking with you. We want you to engage. So we won't have you stand up. But why don't we have everybody raise your hands. If you're in the room, raise your hands. If you can hear me, raise your hands. All right, now leave your hands up if you've ever tried any psychedelics. Be brave. We're all here together. Hands go down. You can be brave about that too. Nobody's hands went down? What the hell? Okay. All right. Why don't you leave your hands up if you've never had a bad trip? Oh, okay. So some hands went down. So let's just unpack that. You can put your hands down now. For better or for worse, some people, I don't know if I'm one of them, believes there's no such thing as a bad trip. There are challenging trips, and what you do with those challenges and those experiences is part of the integration process. So, I really want to thank both you guys for being here tonight. We just met recently. This is a kickoff launch event for a new community coming together around some very special topics. And you're here to share your knowledge, your experiences, and your stories. And that's brave too sometimes. So first, what we want to talk about is that there's a lot of psychedelics companies that are coming online, folks focused on new drug discovery, on advanced drug delivery systems. And I think a good place to start is what sets Interstate apart from these other companies?
Yes. Well, hi again. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Jacob, thanks for having us. It's great to see community come together. And like Christian said, it's nice to come here as a fireside chat as opposed to coming up on a pulpit and talking to you. So I appreciate the moderating and being able to discuss, because being a nascent industry like this, it is about getting to know each other, understanding the authenticity and the integrity behind why we're here and what draws us to psychedelics and mental health specifically. So our stories kind of lead us here, but really specific about Interstate is we were really looking to bridge this gap between wellness and science. It seemed to be that there was like this big chasm between the two, where you have research happening and macrodosing in a synthetic molecule. And then you had the wellness community with amazing stories about the different types of strains and mushrooms they're taking, the nuanced healing that was happening. And you weren't hearing a lot about the research behind the entourage effect. So for me personally, starting to look at how do we dive into that? Because the nuance effect about healing is really what leads us to individualized healing as well. How do I heal myself? What are the different ways to look at that? And from my own personal experience, I've seen how microdosing and the different types of strains could lead me to have different effects. And with that, it started looking at how do we actually start researching this? And it led us on a journey that took about a year to get to, which apparently is pretty fast in academia. And so we have actually signed the research agreement with Ohio State University, and we've started this quest, and we're still waiting for DEA approval, but should be coming soon. And as soon as we do, we'll be researching 10 different psilocybin strains of mushrooms and 2 different functional mushrooms, and looking at the different novel compounds that are in there to really look at the nuanced differences of what's happening with each one, and then how is that affecting us, and how do we actually create better medicines around that. So, thank goodness for things like the synthetic molecule and being able to actually have the process of clinical trials for that. For us, it's really about the discovery of now how do we break that into more nuanced healing. And that's what guided us towards creating Interstate.
That's pretty amazing. Do you want to talk a little bit about your mission and what the North Star is for both of you?
Yeah, really the mission behind it is bridging the gap between wellness and science. And I was guided to that through my own personal journey and the curiosity around diving into my own personal inner state. The journey started at about 15, things from Jungian psychology to astrology, and then having very different parents who, on different occasions, took us from heliotropic breath work in random hotel rooms to ayahuasca trips in Peru to DMT, and the life-changing effects, of course, that it had. And recognizing that not everybody is given these tools. Not everybody has parents like that who are taking you on these incredible journeys. And how do I start finding ways to create better mental health tools that more people have access to? And really about being a light in the world. How do I bring joy, as he was talking about earlier, like how do some people who don't seem to have the ability to find joy find more of that inner strength, the inner safety within themselves to start looking at that journey and discovering a more solid sense of themselves. And my journey took me on many different paths to that place, and really wanted to create something, a company around that. I've been a serial entrepreneur. My father and I started a mescal company 7 years ago, and my dad was the first ever person to grow chocolate in the United States in Hawaii. So I grew up on the fields of Hawaii, tasting chocolate and understanding that food is medicine. And that journey plus seeking led me to go, how do I create this in my own personal company where I can give food as medicine and create more spiritual depth for a community around me? And led me to starting Interstate, and led me to finding Sonny, my CSO, through an incredible journey. And I'll turn it over to give her a little light on this as well.
Yeah, what's your origin story, Sonny? How did this happen? All right, origin story.
Great, yeah.
How this happened for you?
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's such an honor to have this platform. I studied neuroscience. I got my PhD in neuroscience at Dartmouth, and I was very interested in studying emotion and affective processes, particularly as they related to affective disorder and mental illness. I spent a lot of time studying amygdala prefrontal circuitry and learning neuroimaging techniques. And then
I studied that in school too. It's pretty amazing.
Sweet. Yeah, we should chat about it more. And well, by the time I graduated, I realized.
Oh, you graduated? Oh.
I did, yeah. Yeah, somehow. But when I did, I realized that I still didn't really understand a lot about my own emotional processes. I had been studying it from this really cognitive, intellectual perspective, and here I was still kind of struggling to figure out myself. And this is where I moved to the West Coast and eventually got interested in psychedelics. Again, really approaching them as a scientist. How can I use these as tools to continue my research journey? And eventually found myself participating in psychedelic ceremonies, drinking ayahuasca. And I realized that my research question shifted, and what became the most important research question to me at that time was, how can I heal myself? And this is sort of a heuristic inquiry, very qualitative research journey of trying to figure out what's actually happening inside myself. And this took me on a really extensive journey that's been going on for a few years now.
How did you two get connected?
Actually through Sonny's sister, who is part of our other company with Kimosabe, and her brother-in-law started talking to me about his sister-in-law, who's a neuroscientist who is into psychedelics. And I was like, sorry, this sounds like the unicorn I'm looking for. Can you please introduce me? And the minute we spoke, it was kismet, made sense. And since then, it's been really, to Sonny's point about this journey inward. And I laugh because a lot of what we do is really just deep philosophical conversations around a lot of these questions. In fact, even your conversation around the bad trip. And we had a conversation about that coming up here. And we'd had some bad trips that were not pleasant, and I'm not sure they were positive. I don't know if that's, I don't know how I feel about that. So it's interesting in all of that, being able to have that reflective point and knowing that you have the community around you like this. And this is what's really incredible to having, and again, Jacob, thank you for bringing together a social club. And we have some in LA that we're doing as well. I think it's being called PsyLA. Okay.
Ish. We got to check with Jody
and it was
or
this,
Micah.
Yes, Jody and Mike have thrown some great intellectual gatherings of bringing people together to have these deeper conversations around reflections on ourselves. And that is what ultimately I think drew Sonny and myself together, is like, how do we reflect on diving in, bringing the light out, connecting to the community and making other people feel the same way and guiding them to that journey themselves as well. And that's a constant work in progress, and it's an incredible journey. I mean, I feel it's one of those things like we're constantly pinching ourselves like, wow, we're really doing this. Look at all the people we're talking to, and being able to hear, connect with other people doing the same thing is really, it is an honor.
Wow. So, and you said it's only been a year. So when did Interstate officially begin or incorporate?
I think it was July last year.
Wow.
No, sorry. July, I realize we're in 2023,
yeah,
July 2021.
Got you.
Yes.
Great.
Yep.
And then, you guys are doing the startup thing, and you're doing psychedelics, and you're doing research, and you're doing kind of drug discovery-ish, and you're doing VR. And I think somebody smarter than me said you should only do 2 risky things at once. Anything else you want to add here?
Yes. Well, I was going through a divorce at the time.
Oh,
and,
nice.
have 2 kids under 5, so there's that also.
Full plate.
Yeah, it was definitely a interesting choice to start it, because it was probably one of the hardest choices I've ever had. I knew what I was taking on, having started other companies. I understand the entrepreneurial, roller coaster that happens. But ultimately, it was such a deep purpose that I knew I had to do it. And it was sort of like somebody pulling you into, the deep sea, going like, you can swim, you can do it. And you're like, I don't know if I want to. There's a lot out there. And yet, ultimately doing it has been probably one of the more fulfilling things I've ever done. And finding Sonny to have that venture together, and then being able to find and create healing products. I've got an incredible advisory board of coming together with people from neurosurgeons to principal scientists at other academic universities, and their guiding voices, and it's what actually led us to starting our virtual reality experience. We were talking about the onboarding. I have a lot of Disney advisory members, and
Pixar as well, right?
Yes, yeah. And their conversation is always like the onboarding of people into the experience. And so one of the conversations, how do you onboard people into their inner state if they're afraid of talking about mental health? If it feels religious or spiritual, how do we actually start talking about it in a way that feels accessible? So what could we do? And Bruce Vaughan, one of my advisors, started Dreamscape, and Walter Parks and Bruce Vaughan and Steven Spielberg started this as really, the movement into virtual reality. And they discovered that virtual reality is really this incredible empathy tool. And so can we create something that creates empathy, shifts hearts and minds, and starts actually engaging people into potentially the drugless psilocybin microdose? Oh, it's not that bad, it's not that scary. So we came at it from a narrative perspective, creating experience, and then afterwards said, well, we want to make sure we're creating quality, safe, and effective tools. So we need to do some science around this. We need to actually start seeing, does this work, and what is it doing? And that was the wonderful part of bringing Sonny in, is that she then guided our experiments. And I'll let Sonny talk about that, of what she did and kind of what our amazing results ended up.
Yeah, so we had people come in to try our VR build and measured their brain activity before and after experiencing the VR journey using EEG. Has anybody ever had an EEG taken? Yeah. So you put like this kind of swim cap on, and it measures the electrical activity of your brain, and you can see what kind of frequency ranges are increasing or decreasing. We also looked at the entropy of the brain signal and how that changed. If you follow some of the psychedelic literature, entropy is a big topic in terms of how it shifts people's physiology. So yeah, and we found some pretty significant results even in a pretty small sample, and we're working on that paper now. So what we found is that one of the major findings, more significant findings, was that it increased alpha frequency activity in the brain, which is similar to what happens if you're doing yoga nidra or different meditative states. It's kind of this relaxed, non-active brain state that people are shifting into. And we also found that it decreases entropy in the brain, which is a sort of coherent state. It creates a coherence of information and is associated with integration of information across different brain regions. So this is giving us some information about how to inform people what's going to happen to their brain if they try it and what kind of state they can expect to get into.
Great. So I want to come back to the purpose part, because I think the why District216 exists, why do people use psychedelics, why is the time now? I'd really love to know, Sonny, more a little bit from you about why you wanted to join Ashley on this journey. It's not an easy decision to join a startup. There's a lot of hardships. Psychedelics isn't necessarily the easiest thing in the world if you look at the regulatory framework, and not to mention people think you are kind of out there sometimes. So why did you decide to do this, and what's your purpose inside of Interstate? What are you trying to achieve?
Oh, I've been so transformed by psychedelics. I've been so blessed. I have so much gratitude for the opportunities I've received to work on myself and to heal myself, that it seemed like that was the thing most worth studying, is how psychedelics work and how can I make the same journey I had accessible to others. And I was looking to do this before I met Ashley. I had committed my heart to that, and then she just appeared and was doing the exact
So
thing.
2 unicorns is what's going
Yes,
on. Okay,
yes,
perfect.
exactly.
And Ashley, a tough year and all the personal trials and tribulations, and you're a veteran entrepreneur. You're not your first rodeo. What's the real driving purpose? Because it sounds like it's something other than filling the bank account.
Well, I would definitely say looking at 2 young kids and looking at the state of mental health, thinking about their livelihood, their friends' livelihood, and also just the community's livelihood. Obviously, we all went through COVID, and during that I experienced a lot of people, in fact, other people going through divorce who didn't have the tools I had, and some who had full mental breakdowns. And yet my internal life through that process was still pretty incredible. I felt a lot of gratitude, I had amazing community, and I wondered at that point, like, how do I make sure that my kids grow up feeling the way I do, where there was that groundedness and the centeredness in their inner state to be able to feel, and no matter the worst chaos possible, to feel that commitment to themselves and feel joy. And so through that, I was like, I have to find a way to do that and deliver it to the rest of the people out there and my kids.
Nice. Where is Interstate today in terms of the maturation of the business? It's been a short runway, but where is it with the research? Where is it with potential commercialization? Where are you guys with the VR? Just kind of an update.
Yeah, I mean, like the rest of the state of research right now in terms of psychedelics, we are in a research phase. And until we actually see those phase 3 trials come through and see efficacy, we're not going to have rescheduling. So there's that runway of waiting for the research to come through. And I actually think it's a beautiful thing, because I think in cannabis we've sort of lost some of the research element of it. but with psychedelics, there's such a full force ahead with the research happening. So for us, it's really waiting for that. Our runway is probably about a year until the research is done and finalized. And once that happens, depending on scheduling, there may be different pathways to productization. And in the interim, we wanted to focus on what we call the container being the intention. We all talk about it now, like how do we shift psychedelics and the conversation around this from what happened in the 60s to what's happening now? And a lot of it is about setting intention, then about when you consume it, the set and setting, and then the end part of it, which is integration. How do we look at this container and actually start building tools for each part of this? Obviously, we're looking at the consumption part of it, the different types of nutraceuticals and medicine that we can create. And then on the other sides of it, how do we create the intention part? How do we create the integration part? Through virtual reality, we're seeing that we can create this integration component of it, potentially even the intention setting. So for us, that's our focus right now, is how do we build those other container components to make sure this is very safe. People are entering into this prepped, ready, go on the deep dive, not necessarily have a bad trip, or if they do, they know how to integrate it. Because at the end of that, if you don't know how, I'll
re-traumatize yourself.
Well, I had that experience. I did DMT and I experienced my own death. And I experienced my own death for the next year in dreams to come of feeling myself release. And I look back at that and go, I should have had better integration. I should have had therapy happening at that time because it was really scary. Again, thankfully, I knew kind of what I was doing. But I could imagine if I didn't, the constant traumatizing of that is really intense. So building integration tools is pretty critical.
Sure. And then on the research side, as you get into phase 2 or phase 3 clinical trials, maybe it'd be biased if everyone was a member of District 216, but as you're looking for candidates, how do people get involved in clinical trials if they want to participate?
That part, we're not at that. We're not doing
we can't do this next week? Oh.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Johns Hopkins, I'm sure some of these other, there's a lot of great news articles right now, and psychedelic alpha is one of them. Obviously Johns Hopkins, looking to them, I'm sure there's always things happening. I think there's an app called Qualitative Citizen. Quantified Citizen. Yeah. I know that they have an app dedicated to people being able to actually participate in clinical trials.
Excellent. And then in terms of where the company is right now, maybe Sonny, talk a little bit about what people might experience if they go inside and put on the VR.
Right, yeah. So it's an 8.5-minute journey that resembles a psilocybin journey. It takes you both outward and inward. You go to outer space and you go inward inside your brain. So and in terms of participating in our experiments, if you want to come get your brain measured up in Eugene, Oregon, which is where I live, that door is open.
Does anybody want to get their brains measured and participate?
Yeah.
Get a few. Great. So where will Interstate be headed tomorrow? We're kind of like current state. Where are you headed? And talk a little bit about the timelines. The next year, 5 years.
Sure.
What's the aspiration?
Again, research is our number one. Closer? There we go. Okay. Timeline for research, we're looking at about a year before we get to the end results of knowing what those novel compounds are in those 10 different psilocybin strains. And then from there, our VR product, we're looking at, we really want to dive into creating this succinct understanding around integration. So our focus is really looking at that. And the next step is actually doing this in a neurosurgeon's facilities. He's got a brain spa called Neurovella, and we'll be taking in there and doing perioperative VR experiences to start seeing if people going into surgery can have a more relaxed state utilizing things like virtual reality. So that's our next step, and we're really excited about that because if that shows efficacy, there's a lot that can be done there.
And what's the time horizon for that? That sounds really exciting.
Yeah, that's happening in the next couple of weeks.
Wow. Mm-hmm. So if I'm having brain surgery, I can then participate?
Yes.
So I guess one of the things that we talked about previously, and I want to make sure we hit on it, we got pretty personal and I think pretty authentic. So thank you for sharing and being brave. The mission for you guys inside of Interstate about being a light in the world. What does that mean to you both? And maybe Sonny, you start.
What does it mean to be a light in the world? I feel like it's all about going inward and dropping into the deepest wounds within myself. And that is where I find the deepest insight and wisdom and can mine the light out from within myself and offer it to others.
Yeah, that was a good statement on that one. And being the light in the world, to me, is meaning that as much as possible that I am helping to create positive experiences, whether that be in personal interactions, in a community, collective way, making sure that what I'm doing is always of highest integrity. So for me, that's really the focus for being the light.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. I'm curious about how does working with a research program at a higher ed institution like Ohio State, go Buckeyes. I don't know why the UC system's not involved. But, getting that program to even happen in the first place, a little bit of that story would be pretty interesting, whatever you can share. And then what are the direct benefits to Interstate in having that relationship?
It's definitely a circuitous path at times to get to those partnerships. I think a lot of it was timing and connecting at the right point and finding the right people, and we had a lobbyist helping us through those connections and being able to really look at what new systems are coming through. I mean, Ohio State University just started their psychedelic education 6 months prior to us talking to them. So they were looking for research partners at that point.
Another unicorn. There's lots of unicorns in the story.
There is. That is the thing about startups and entrepreneurialism that you have to recognize is that it is about timing. And sometimes you have to let flow happen. It was definitely not happening fast enough for me, but again, knowing the system and knowing how this works now, it was really fast. And having people on the team, we have an advisory member who is provost at Alabama, who is helping to direct this and understanding contracts and connections. And it really is a dance, making sure that you understand how those systems work and that bureaucracy is at play. But being patient with that, I think, is a critical component too.
Yeah, it's amazing also just to work with the experts there. We have an amazing mycologist on our team and a geneticist, and I'm coming from neuroscience, so those are not my fields. And to be on such a fabulous interdisciplinary team, I think that's where the future of psychedelic science is. How can we look at these compounds from all these different perspectives and really tie them together into a larger picture?
Really interesting. And since you're collaborating with the university, is there shared IP? Do you guys own it all after the research, or how does that work?
I'm going to leave that one to being in our
fair
contract.
Enough. Fair enough. So, you folks are working with the mushrooms. It sounds like there's several varieties or cultivars that you're working with. 10, was that right? Mm-hmm. 10 different ones. What's the status on what's growing? Like, what's happening with the growing?
Not yet. We got to wait for the DEA approval, which again, that's bureaucracy as well. So
Okay.
it's a process through that. And once it happens, we will be doing a sort of a public affairs campaign around it to discuss it, because it is big news, and being able to dive in a little bit further and being able to have a news cycle around it.
And you for sure will be one of the first and only companies that have that approval when it's granted.
DEA, definitely the only DEA approval at a major university for a grow house at this point.
I'm familiar with some labs that have gotten the right to do production of Schedule 1 substances, but it's very limited and not very many of them.
Yeah.
And then can you maybe talk about how whatever you end up doing with the mushrooms might intersect with what you're doing with the virtual reality, or are those always going to be on separate paths?
Definitely just in terms of looking at, again, this container and looking at better mental health tools, it's really looking at how do you create a toolkit for people to come and access and give them understanding around that container of how to actually do good healing within this safe space. Setting your intentions, setting the set and setting, having the integration. It doesn't always mean doing psychedelics. It also just means doing the inner work. And how do you access that? And then, what are the tools and the ways in which you can do that to better provide access to your inner state? So for us, it's really just a toolkit that we're building out for people to utilize.
That's pretty great. Sonny, what's some of the research prompts or the additional research that you're looking to pursue?
Oh my gosh, a lot. I have so many research questions. I'm very curious about measurement, and in psychology, it's really hard to measure things. So if you just think about it for a little bit, like, how do we measure depression? How do we measure anxiety? How do we get that number of how anxious someone is, how depressed someone is, et cetera, et cetera? How do we measure what's happening in a psychedelic journey? This is a question that has interested me for a very long time in coming up with new measurement tools that really can assess where people are at in their journey and what the arc of the journey is and how we can map out that journey. So one of my research collaborators who's on our advisory board, Dr. Susie Ross, has studied life transformation and has detailed some of these transformation cycles that happen over the course of a lifetime with major life events, which a psychedelic journey is just one example of a major life event that someone could have. So I'm working with her to develop new measurement tools. And this is an ongoing, deep research question that I have a lot of passion about.
Well, and Sonny, I'd love for you to sort of expand upon the three aspects of what good measurement would be focused on in the paper that you wrote, talking about.
Right. Yeah. So one of the problems that I see in psychological measurement is kind of the shallowness at which the mind is measured. And so often people are just filling out forms, and there's no effort to use the things we know about psychology to make people feel safe enough to actually divulge the information about their inner process. And so I see ethics as a key part of clean psychological measurement. It's actually, you can't separate ethics and science in psychology. And so the paper that I've written on this topic focuses on compassion and openness and reverence for the data. And if the researcher can bring these elements, which are ethics, to the research project, then there can be an interaction between the researcher and the participant that actually allows information about that person's inner sacred process to come to the surface and for us to actually take accurate measurements about what's happening.
That sounds critical. It sounds like there's probably so much confusion and loss of information, or people being afraid to share.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And afraid to even participate in research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So participation, that's a great segue. So thank you guys for being so patient during the chat. We're going to move to some Q&A. I've got some questions I can keep rolling with, but I'd rather get some questions from the audience. Are you guys game to participate? Are you here to participate? Raise your hand if you're, you're out there. Okay. Does anybody have a question they want to stand up and share? We think we can get it right out of the audience if you want. Go ahead, please.
On that last topic you were just discussing, how is measurement currently conducted for these types of things? Is it mostly user report, kind of sentiment and feeling? Is there cortisol or some type of brain chemical measurement, combination of the two? I'd just love to hear the other side of where it exists today and tie that into what you just said.
So the question's focused on what's currently going on in measurement and having Sonny talk a little about that.
Yeah, so for clinical outcomes of psychiatry, the gold standard is self-report measures, or a clinician's assessment of based on what that person is saying their experience is. There are studies that take biomarkers, but the biomarkers are all over the place. They're very messy measurements. And so if you, for example, in studies that look at how is a depressed person's brain different than a non-depressed person's brain, there's so much overlap that even if there's a significant difference along a certain marker, it's too noisy for us to just measure that thing and know for sure what's happening in that person's experience. And so we still have to ask them subjectively, how do you feel? And that's the gold standard right now.
And that's all over the map.
Yeah.
That's also all over the map, and part of the problem is that people treat it as if there's no noise in that data.
Right, and there's a lot.
Yeah, there's
lot of noise.
there's no method for estimating the noise in those data.
Another question? Anybody have a hand up? Yeah, please go ahead and just. There you go. He's got a mic.
Probably don't need this, but I was just wondering: is Interstate taking any angel investment, or have you, or are you? And is there a valuation on the company?
Yes, we are, and we can talk to you later if you're interested, or you can email us. I'm sure you'll connect us. Great. Yes is the answer.
So angel investments taken and open dialogue on new investment opportunities. Any other questions out there? Yeah, please, go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead. Right. Yeah, shout. Sorry, unless they get a mic over there. Here it comes.
First of all, thanks for what you do. I've been around this work for a long time. How available, I think one of the most important pieces that you fortunately came to beyond consumption is integration. And that takes sometimes a really long time to integrate what the experience has been. How available will this VR system that you've been working with be for those who aren't necessarily coming from the consumption path to you? Is the VR something that can be used more broadly?
Yes, it definitely can. Right now, we're trying to figure out the right pathway, and some of the conversations actually putting it into integration centers and figuring out how can we connect this to most people. To be honest, Oculus is kind of a mess in the VR community, and it's an interesting one because they don't want to approach psychedelics. So there is some off-putting aspects to that. So figuring out, I know Trip App is doing amazing stuff as well, and just trying to find, to that point, the right distribution pathway. But yes, we want to make it accessible. And thank you.
Great question. Another question on this side. Anybody over here? Yep.
So on that note, how do you ensure that the pricing is affordable over time? Because as we know, the pharmaceutical industry has had a long bad inertia around not making it accessible for a lot of people.
In regards to the pharmaceutical pathway, it's definitely about how do we figure out policy measures around this that potentially allow access to creating nutraceuticals and being able to look for pathways that do allow for better price tags, because that is definitely something on our minds that we talk a lot about, because right now with the service centers, the price tags are going to be high. So that's all in the conversation. We don't necessarily have an answer right now, but it's definitely on forefront of our mind, because that wellness needs to extend further than people who can afford it.
Another question or two? There's a hand going. Go ahead, please, if you can.
If an issue here is integration, when what's missing for me is hearing you talk about being involved with therapists, people that are doing psychedelic assisted therapy seem to be missing. You didn't mention therapies at all, but isn't that part of the picture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. We have a couple of therapists on our scientific advisory board, and we've been having discussions about part of the discussion that we've been having is what experiences people are having right now as they, this particular therapist has clients who have tried to gain access to psychedelics through the underground wellness community, and how can we? It's a fine line, because she feels like she can't give them information about psychedelics because it's illegal, and that compromises her licensure and things like that. And at the same time, it's unethical not to tell them about these options because they're so profoundly healing. So these are conversations we're having with therapists on our board, absolutely. And another person who we work with is designing a facilitator training program. And so we're actively in conversations about what those training programs look like in terms of how these facilitators can help people integrate, as there's just a wide array of interpretations of what integration means and how long it should last and what the process is before and after. So we're definitely having these conversations with a wide range of people, including therapists. And I think ultimately, though, one of the things I'm hearing from therapists is that the one-on-one work that they do, it's so time-intensive, so energy-intensive, the whole burden can't fall on the therapists. There needs to be other tools that help people, because people can't be in therapy every day. It's just, it's not affordable for the client, and it's not possible for the therapist either, just in terms of their energy. So these are definitely ongoing conversations we're having with therapists and people who are involved in the facilitator training.
Yeah, so therapists are definitely key to a lot of these programs, and not just Interstate, but others. We'll bring it home with a couple more questions. Yeah, please, go ahead.
On that note, it's funny, as a spiritual psychologist, I'm taking people on that inner road, and you can only do talk therapy really for so long. And in my experience, I've found that we get to a certain point and I need something experiential. I need something to be able to offer that's experiential. And I've been waiting for you guys to come into my life. And so I'm also wondering, part of that process is going to be the dealing with people, getting to some core issues, starting that way in, and depending on how much they've built up to get in. Then they get to have the experience, and then we need it on the other side to be able to integrate. So the question becomes, do you have to see a therapist first? Do you have to be somebody that, gets passed on? Can someone just walk in and go, I'm looking for an experience? How there's going to be that, that course. But I'm so happy to have you guys.
Yep, there we go. Thank you for that, because and I'd love to talk later, because as Sonny mentioned, how you're talking to your clients about this, we'd really appreciate insight off the book, because people are asking desperately, how do we give this to our clients without breaking or not breaking ethical codes and legal issues? So it's a major conversation right now.
Yeah, and I would say, just from my own personal experience, I found it to be critical to have not necessarily a therapist, but some sort of mentorship or counselor, some relationship that's trusted on both sides of that experience.
So I think that's probably a great place to bring it home. It's so nice to have everybody here. Honestly, thank you for being here tonight and let's have this conversation. Thank you to Sonny and Ashley for coming out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
We'll talk to you
Christian.
more afterward.